Hey coders, welcome to another exciting episode of Laravel with Livewire series. Today we are going to implement multi-user authentication system because we have two different type of users. The first ones are customers for this shop and the second type of users are admins for our backend, which is managing the things like updating the inventory, managing the orders and stuff like that. So we definitely need two different kind of users. That means we have to look into implementing a multi-user authentication system and its intricacies. The second interesting thing that we are going to do is, instead of depending on any kind of packages that Laravel currently provides, we are going to implement the authentication system from scratch without any reliance on any of the packages. Now, Laravel currently offers different packages that we can use to implement off-the-shelf authentication system. If we use any of those packages, we will not have to implement the authentication system from scratch, which of course makes life easier in the short term, but in the long term, it has its own disadvantages. The first disadvantage is that each of these packages, let me mention the packages names as well before I forget. So we have two packages with the basic functionality called Laravel Breeze and Jetstream. These two packages are simple packages and offer complete but basic functionality needed for implementing authentication system. Then we have more advanced packages with more capabilities such as Laravel Passport and Sanctum. These two packages offer more functionality and they are usually preferred for the production phase of any application. If we go on to the route of using those packages, we can simply install this package and the functionality is available instantly. But the problem with these packages is that, number one, they come with their own theme which might not match with the theme that we are implementing for our project. So changing the physical appearance of the theme by digging into the code and looking for the pieces of the code which affect the user interface is more, I would say, hard work than implementing everything from scratch. The other thing that I would say is more serious disadvantage is over the course of Laravel frameworks, Laravel has offered and abandoned different authentication packages. So even if we use one of the packages that Laravel is currently advocating or offering, there is a great chance that in future they might abandon this package and come up with a completely new package for authentication system. In that case, we will also be forced to make changes to our project. That means we have to bring our website down, make those changes, and then bring it back offline. Besides, even if those packages are continued, every time a change is made to those packages, we will again be forced to make changes to our application as well. So rather than relying on these packages, we are going to implement our own authentication system. This way, we will also be able to understand authentication system in more depth, which will of course go a long way in our career. Okay, so this is the reasoning behind going after implementing authentication system from scratch rather than using one of these packages. Now let's discuss how to go about implementing this authentication system from scratch. Okay, so before we discuss any of the technicalities of multi-user authentication system, let's first create two controllers, one of which is going to handle the user account and another one is going to handle the admin account. So let's create a controller PHP artisan make controller. Let's give it a name user account, or shall we say customer account. Okay, now let's create another one for the admin account. Okay, in the controllers folder, let's click on this admin folder and let's create a method there. I'm giving this function the name home because this function will return as the home page of the user or admin. So simply return a view. Where shall we create this view? Let's go to the views folder. Okay, so we have this admin folder. Now within this admin folder, let's create another folder with the name account. And there, let's create a blade file, home.blade.php. Okay, now let's go back to our controller. So return view. In the views folder, we have a folder named admin. There we have another folder with the name account. And there we have a blade file named home. So this is returned. So now let's go to this blade file, generate the skeleton code, and in the body, for the time being, let's just put a paragraph. This is home page for the admin. Of course, we will make changes over here, but we need to have something to display in the browser at the moment. So let's go with this generic message. Now we have to do the same for the customer controller. So let me copy this and let's go to the customer controller. So this is the customer controller. Let's paste it over here. Now let's change this to account.home. Now let's go back to our views folder. Okay, so over in the views folder, let's create another folder called account, and in the account let's create a file named home.blade.php, and to this one we are going to copy everything from the home of admin and let's paste in the customers homepage. So this is the homepage for customers. Okay, let's go back to the customer controller, customer account controller. Okay, we don't need to make any changes over here. Okay, now we need routes for these two methods in the web.php file. So let's open web.php. So the routes that begin with admin over here, let's go further down. Okay, let's create another route for the controller, admin account. It's not supposed to be enclosed within the quotation marks. Okay, now let's group it together because we are obviously going to add more methods to this controller. So function route get, let's make it home, and it will return us the home method as well. Let's give it the name. What shall we give it name? It's admin.home. Copy. In fact, let's copy this whole thing. Copy. Colon was missing. Admin controller. Let's import it. Admin account. It's okay. So this has been imported. Now for this shop, let's paste it, change the name from admin to customer account, and for the home, it's DA is missing, admin. So we will also have a route ending with /home, but if it's prefixed with shop, then it will return us the home page for the customer. Okay, let's test them out. We have done some mistakes somewhere. Semicolon and import the class. Good. Okay, now append home to this one. So this is home page for the admin. Now let's append this /home to the shop, and okay, let's go to the routes. Okay, the problem is over here. Now if you notice over here, this is a more generic route compared to this /home. So this says /category, but this category is actually a variable. That means if you pass anything to this category variable, that will become the value of this category variable, even if it's home. So whenever we are writing shop /home, because the home can be the value of this category variable, so this one takes precedence. So what we have to do is that we have to give this route /home more importance. That is, this route should be checked first, and if this route is not the one, then go for this one. So in order to give this route more precedence over this more generic one, so this is more specific route and this is more generic route. So we are going to give this route more preference. So such that this route will be checked first. So Control X and place it before this one. Okay. So if it's slash, so first this route will be checked, that after the shop, if there is more to our URL, then it will be checked if it's home. If it's home, then this method will execute from this customer account controller. However, if it's not home and anything else, then that anything else will be passed as a value to this category variable. Okay. Let's refresh. Now it says this is home page for the customers. Okay, so now we have these two pages which will eventually contain all the information related to the customer, if it belongs to the customer pages, if it belongs to the shop, or admin info if it belongs to the admin side. Okay, now our next step towards implementing multi-user authentication is to understand a concept called middlewares. So what are middlewares? Well, as you can guess from the name, it sits in the middle of something. So there are two entities and this middleware has to be sitting between those two entities. What those two entities are, we are going to discuss them in a moment, but what it does is that when it sits between these two entities, the control flow becomes first the first entity is executed, then anything which is sitting in the middle as a middleware, that middleware will be executed, and then eventually the last entity will get executed. So that's why it's given the name middleware. If we have two components or two pieces of code, and if we are going to sandwich another piece of code between these two pieces of code, then the piece of code which is sandwiched inside is called a middleware. Other than that, there is nothing special about it. But the middleware is the piece of code which we can insert between two pieces of code if we like, or we can take it out if we don't like. And if we want, we can keep on adding multiple middlewares between those two original pieces of code. So that's the general idea about middleware. Now let's come up with more concrete example. Well, the two pieces of code that I was talking about, between which this middleware can be sandwiched in, are usually the HTTP request and HTTP response. So when a HTTP request is sent from the browser, before it reaches the controller which performs whatever is the task defined within that controller method, if we like, if our application demands, we can inject another piece of code which will execute after a HTTP request has been received by the Laravel application and before the HTTP response is generated. And we usually do this so that we can filter out specific HTTP requests based on certain criteria. For example, you cannot view a user's home page if you are not logged in. So you need to be logged in to view your home page. So when we send this request from the browser shop/home, this home page should only be visible to us if we are already logged in. If we are not logged in, we should not see this. So this is called filtering out the HTTP request. So depending on the status of our authentication, this request could be filtered out, letting us know that you are not logged in. So you cannot view this, or this request could be permitted to be executed and a proper response can be returned back to us. So this is an example of using middlewares. Now if you don't like the idea of middlewares, we can do the same task in the controller method as well. We don't have to use middlewares. It's not mandatory. However, it makes more sense. So let's go to the customer account. Okay. So over here we can define the logic. If customer is logged in, then return this view as return error, you are not eligible to view this page unless login, something like that. So we can very much define this logic within this controller method as well. But if we do this, we are violating the separation of concern concept. If this function is designed to represent the home page of a customer, then this is all it should do. It should not be tightly coupled with some other logic. Because let's say in future, we want to define another criteria to either view the customer's home page or not. So rather than plotting our home function, we can separate this piece of code into another file or another entity as well. This way, if we like, we can replace that file with something else and we don't have to make any changes to this home function. Okay, so I hope this idea is clear. Okay, so far I hope you are with me. Now let's see how can we use this middleware to make sure that this home page is only visible to us if you are actually logged in. Otherwise, we should not be able to see this page. Now the question remains, how can we define this middleware so that we can sandwich it between this HTTP request and HTTP response. Well, because this kind of filtering is so common because almost every application is going to need authentication, so Laravel has already created this middleware for us. We don't have to define this middleware. Okay, so now we have established that we already have this middleware present, but where is it? Okay, so let's go to our code editor and we are going to this HTTP folder which is inside this app folder. So over here you can see we have a file named kernel. Now this kernel file contains all the middleware that Laravel has already defined for us. We don't have to reinvent the wheel for the basic functionalities that almost all applications need. Okay, so now this contains 3 different sets of middlewares. The first one is inside an array which is called middleware, which contains all of these middlewares. Let's discuss what these middlewares are in a second, but let's go to the second group, which is enclosed within an array called middleware group. Now this array is actually a 2-dimensional array, or shall we say associative array in PHP, because each element of this middleware group's array is another array. But because this is not an index-based array, rather it has a name instead of a numeric index, so we call it an associative array. So the first element of this middleware group's array is an array with the name web, and the second one has this API. The name is API. Okay. Now the third one is called again an array, and it's called route middleware. This also contains a collection of middlewares, but the unique thing about this group is that each of these middlewares have been given an alias. For example, this middleware, which is defined in app HTTP middleware authenticate class, rather than referring to this whole namespace, we can refer to it with this alias called auth. The second one, which provides authenticate with basic auth, is given the alias auth.basic. Likewise, we have auth session, cache headers, chain, guest, password, confirm, sign, throttle, verified. So for our today's authentication system, we will be heavily using these 2 middlewares. The first one is this authenticate middleware, which has alias called auth, and the second one is this one, redirect if authenticated, but its alias is guest. So we will be heavily using these 2 middlewares. Now this first group, as you can read this comment over here, the application's global HTTP middleware state. So any request that you send through this browser, all of those HTTP requests are sandwiched with all of these middlewares. So first this middleware is executed, then the second one is executed, then the third one, fourth one, fifth one, and sixth one. Now if you notice, this handle code is the middleware that whenever we have been using the form and we have been inserting a directive called @csrf, so this is the middleware that handles that CSRF related stuff. Then we have this trim strings middleware. So basically when we are entering some data through the forms, except for the password fields, if for any other input fields you have inserted some data, but in the beginning you have inserted some empty spaces, or at the end there are some empty spaces, they will be trimmed off automatically. Then this one, we have also seen examples of this middleware as well, convert empty string to null. So if you remember in the very earlier videos, whenever we entered product details and the input fields which were optional, I did not input any data for them. But in our database, those empty input fields were stored values null, because Laravel automatically converted those empty strings to null values, and that's why those null values got stored in the database as well. So basically all of these middleware gets applied to the every HTTP request, no matter what. Then there comes the second group. Now this group is divided into 2 parts. Number 1 is web and second one is API. So as you know that the browser is not the only way to interact with any application. We can communicate through APIs as well. So whenever you type something in the browser and you get a web page as a result, that means you are using this set of middlewares called web middlewares. However, if you are requesting some data through some kind of API, then you are making this request behind the scenes. So behind the scenes, our application fetches the data using this API. You do not necessarily type in anything in the browser, and neither do you get any web page as a response. You get some data, and then your own application displays that data in the browser. You did not get that whole HTML page through API request. Through API request, you can only get back data. But for the web-based request, you get the whole HTML page that gets displayed in the browser. So that's the difference between the web-based and the API-based middlewares. So if your request is web-based, so these middlewares get applied, and if your request is API-based, these middlewares get applied. Okay. Now there comes this route middleware. So this is the collection of middlewares that are already made available to us, but they are not being applied to any application implicitly. If we like, we can use any of these middlewares, only then these middlewares will be executed. But currently, none of these middlewares are being executed. So what we are going to do is that we are going to use this middleware, because now we want to filter this route based on whether the customer is logged in or not. That is, the customer is authenticated or not. So now we want to check if this customer is logged in, only then the customer should be able to view this page, otherwise customer should not view this page. So let's do that. So since we have this middleware available, now we have to let our Laravel application know that whenever this URL is received, this middleware should also be checked against. So to do that, since we are checking it against the routes, so let's go to our web.php over here, and currently we are with the customer. So okay, so over here for this home function of the customer controller, we are going to chain in another method which is called middleware, and the name of the middleware is auth. So now we are saying that for this route, that is shop/home, whenever this route is received, you have to make sure if the user is authenticated or not. If the user is not authenticated, we will not be able to view this page. Now since we haven't yet registered any user, so obviously now technically we should not be able to see this page. So let's refresh it. Route login not defined. Okay, so what happened is that this auth middleware was executed, and now where is this auth middleware defined? It's defined in app http middleware authenticate. So app http middleware and authenticate. Now this authenticate middleware or authenticate class extends another middleware called middleware. Now this middleware is defined in the illuminate auth middleware folder. Now this illuminate folder is defined in the vendor folder. So that means this is one of the core files of the Laravel framework. So that means we are not supposed to make changes to this file. But let's go there and see what is defined over here. Again, over here we are saying that we are implementing another interface called authenticate request. But let's have a look what is defined in this class itself. So over here it's checking if the user is authenticated, and if it's not authenticated, then this part will be executed, which is unauthenticated. Now let's go to this function and see what does it says. Unauthenticated. Now over here we are saying we are throwing an authentication error, an authentication exception, but then we are executing this redirect to request method, redirect to method. Now this redirect to method is empty over here, but in the authenticate class, which is defined in the, where is it? This one, the original one, app http middleware. Over here this redirect method is overridden. So this method will only be executed if you are not authenticated. And over here it's simply saying return the user to a route named login. Now currently we do not have any route which has the name login. So as you can see, it says no result. So currently there is no such route defined. So that's why we are getting this error. So basically when we made this request, the HTTP request was received by the Laravel framework, and it went through the default middlewares, and then eventually it executed the authentication middleware. And since the user is not authenticated, it redirected back to a route which is called login. Now because there is no such route defined over here, so that's why we are seeing this error. Had we defined any route with this name login, we would have been redirected back to that page. So what we are going to do is that temporarily we are going to change this homepage for the shop from shop.homepage to, let's change it to login temporarily, and now we should be able to see the shop's homepage, and here we can see the shop's homepage. So every time now, if we try to go to the homepage for the customer, we will be redirected back to the same page. So this is the magic of using middlewares. Let's change this back to, what was it, shop.home. Okay, so now basically what we have done is that we are guarding this route shop/home with a middleware called auth. Now currently we have attached this middleware with this route. Now there is another way to attach or associate a middleware, then that way is we can use this middleware within the controller itself. So for the customers we are going to use the middlewares with the routes, but for the admin we are going to define the middleware in the controller itself. So let's go to admin account controller, and over here now let's define the constructor, public function underscore construct this middleware. Let's give it the name auth. Now over here, if we define a middleware within the constructor method itself, that means every method which is defined in this constructor will automatically be guarded with this middleware. So currently we have only this one function, but if we had more functions defined over here, let's say 5 more, then all of those 5 functions will also be guarded with this middleware auth automatically as well. So currently we don't have any, but let's see if we are now able to see this home page. We should not be able to see this because again we are guarding this URL with the authentication middleware, which means we should only be able to see this page if we are already logged in. If we are not, we should not be able to see this. Now click, and again we got the same error because we were not authenticated, so we got redirected back to a route called login. Now because no such route is defined in our routes yet, so we are getting this error. Other than seeing this error, this means our middleware has successfully been injected between this HTTP request and the HTTP response, and it's also doing its job as well. We will look into resolving this error a bit later. Now why not next define these login pages for both customer as well as the admin. So let's create another controller. Let's create admin login and one more, customer login. Okay, let's close these. Now open admin login. Now over here we need 2 functions. One is going to fetch the form, the login form, and the second one is going to submit the form. So public function login and another one public function authenticate. Now this login function is simple. It will simply return a view which will contain the form. So it's in admin. Shall we put it in the account folder? Okay, so admin account, then login. We will define the authentication logic in a while. First, let's create this login blade file. So let's go down to the views. Okay, now in this account folder, which is inside the views, let's create this login form. Login.blade.php. Now over here, let's create h1 admin login form. Now let's create the form. Method is going to be post. We will need CSRF directive. Now let's create the input field. So the first one is going to be input field of type email. Name is email, ID is also email. Let's replace this ID with placeholder. The second one is input field of type password. Name is password and placeholder. Now input field of type now in the action, let's define the routes first, then we will come back and fill in this action. So let's open web routes. These are admin, all of these are admin routes. Let's create a route for the controller. Group it because we definitely need more than one route for this controller, so group them in a function. So the first one is get route. Get, the route is /login and the controller method is login as well. Let's give it a name, admin.login. The second one is going to be for the post method, so copy paste. Let's change it from get to post and let's keep it same route name, but the method is going to be authenticate and the name is going to be admin.auth, or make it complete, admin.authenticate. Okay, now we will need similar routes for the customer as well, so copy and within this shop let's paste it. Let's change the name from admin login to customer login. Import class and let's change the names from admin to customer. Okay, now let's go to the login controller, and over here first of all we have to extract the data from the request, then validate it and then check it against the database. That is, we have to look for any row in the relevant database tables whose credentials match with the input values entered by the user. So when I say user, it can be both the customer as well as the admin. So we are going to store the validated data in a variable called data. We are using request helper function to access the data, and to that we are passing the data that we want to be validated inside the array. So the first one is email, and the validations that we are going to apply is it is required and it should be in the email format, that is it should have @ symbol. Okay, now for the password, again required and minimum, let's make it 4, even though ideally it should be at least 8, but I want to type in as fewer characters as possible, so I'm keeping it 4. Okay, so what was I saying? Yeah, if this validate method actually is successfully able to validate this data and store it in this variable data, otherwise this authenticate method will be terminated right here. That means if there is further logic defined, it will not be processed any further and we will automatically get redirected back to the form. Okay, so now assuming that we have successfully validated our data, next thing is now we have to try to match these credentials with one of the rows in the admin database. So first let me check if we have already created this admin field. Okay, so our database is eLaraShop, and there we have these tables. Let me check the admin. No, we haven't actually created the admin table. So let's create this one first. Now, in order to create this database table, we have to create a migration file. So php artisan make migration. Let's give it the name admin. Now, along with this migration file, we want to create the model file as well, because this migration file will create the database table within the database. But in order to insert data or delete data from that table or update data, we have to have a model associated with that table. So therefore, we are also creating a model. Is it make model admin and then -m? Yes. So I was going the other way around. Okay, so we have created a model, and along with it, we have also created the migration table. Okay, so this is the migration table created. So let's go and have a look at this table first. Now let's go to the migrations. Okay, so these are the migrations, and since this is the very last one, the recent one that we have created, so it will be appended at the end. Create admins table. Okay. Okay, so this is the file that has been created, the migration file. Now, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to copy all the columns that we have in the users table to the admin table as well. Okay, so we have this remember token. So copy, and let's open the admin. Okay, now paste it. So we have a column named name, then an email column, email verified at, which is nullable, that means optional, and then we have password, remember tokens. Okay. Now both the admins table as well as the users table contain the same structure, or shall I say schema. Okay. So to migrate this file, the command is php artisan migrate. Since we had only one migration that was recently created and was not migrated, so only one migration took place. Now let's verify in the database table. Okay, eLaraShop, let's refresh this. Now we have this admins table. ID, name, email verified at, password, remember token created at, and updated at. Same as we have users one. Okay. Now next what we need to do is that let's go back to the admin login controller and continue with the authentication process. Okay, now we have to match these values against one of the tables in the database table. Currently our database tables are empty, but if we had data, then this is how the authentication would take place. Now we don't have to actually define this authentication logic ourselves. We have this logic already defined in the Laravel. We just have to use that functionality. Okay, so that functionality is available to us through a facade called auth, and this auth facade has different functions, but the one that we are interested in over here is called attempt. So this attempt method will attempt to verify these credentials against one of the rows in the admin database table. So now as you can see, this attempt method takes an array, and these have been already provided to us. So we can either do this, or since we already have these pieces of information in the data variable, so we are passing this data. Now we have to import this facade. So this facade has been imported. Okay, so this attempt method will verify these details against one of the rows in the table, and if they match, this method will return true, otherwise it returns false. So that means we can enclose this within an if block. So if it's true, that means the user has been successfully authenticated. In that case, we want to generate a new session for the user. Request session this regeneration is important for the security reasons, so that we by accident don't reutilize a previously present session. So the moment you are logged in successfully, you get a new session regenerated. Okay, now next we want to be redirected back to redirect to the intended page, and if no intended page is present, then redirect back to admin home page. So this intended will try to redirect you back to the page from which you were diverted to the login page. For example, you are trying to access a page which is guarded by auth middleware, but you are not currently logged in. You will be redirected to the login page, and if you successfully log in, this intended method will take you back to that page. Otherwise, if you are not redirected from anywhere else and the first URL that you have typed into the browser is this login page, then you will be redirected to the admin page. That's the logic for successfully logging in. However, if you fail to successfully log in that case, this return will be executed. So you will be returned back to where you were, that is the the login form with errors, and the error method will contain the error, and the value is invalid credentials. But we also want to refill the email input field with the same input field that the user entered. So with input, and the input we are going to get from the request. Let's divide it into multiple lines so that we can easily see what we are doing. Okay, from the request, only access email. Okay, so this is the logic. First we are validating the data, then we are attempting to log in using the auth facade. If we successfully log in, then we are redirected back to the intended page. That means the page that we are viewing before we were redirected to this login page, or if this was the very first page that we typed in the browser, then we will be redirected to the admin.home page. Otherwise, if the authentication fails, then we will be returned back to the the login form with the error message, invalid credentials, and with inputs, that is the email that we typed in. Okay, we need similar logic for the customers as well. So let's copy this, and let's open customer login. Let's copy everything. Copy and paste it over here, customer login. For the customer, we have account folder within the view, so account.login, and let's import this auth facade. Okay, for the intended redirect, customer.home. Okay, now create this account.login form. Let's go to the views. So here is this account. Let's create login.blade.php. Okay, so this form we were supposed to create in the admin account folder. So yes, now in this account folder, let's create login.blade.php. Control copy, close it, paste. Login form, admin login form, let's change it to customer login form. So now we have one login form for the customers and one login form for the admins. Okay, we have already created the web routes. let's first verify if we are able to see those input forms, sorry, login forms. So admin login, okay, this is empty. So over here, let's use the route. Now since we have already created the routes, which form is this? This is the user customer, okay. So customer dot authenticate. That's the route name that we have defined in the web routes. Okay, now for the admin. Okay, now for the admin login form. Route admin dot authenticate. Okay. Now for the customers, again login, not found. Same problem. Control X and paste it at the end because this route is more generic. Okay. Okay, so now we have defined the authentication logic as well as the login forms for both the admin and the customer. Now we are ready to test these logics out. But in order to do that, we need to have at least one user and one admin in the respective tables. And since we haven't yet created any registration forms through which we can register new users, what we are going to do is that we are going to use Tinker to store one user and one admin data in the tables. So let's clear this out first. Now PHP artisan Tinker. Okay, so now we are inside the Tinker shell. Now let's create a user first. So let's create a customer, new. Now we have the customers in user. So we have to use the model, this model user. So namespace is app models, new app models, and the model name is user. Okay, so now a user model has been created. Now we are going to set its column values. So customer, let's have a peek at the columns in this migration table. So we have ID, but this is auto generating. Then name, email, this is nullable, and password. 3 of them are mandatory because this is an ID method, so it knows that it needs to be automatically generated. So we don't need to provide the ID. However, for the name, email, and password, we have to provide the values. So customer name is, let's make it user1 is fine. Then customer email, let's give it user1@user.com. Then customer password. Now if we give any value to this password, this value will be stored as it is, that is in the plain text in our database. However, we want to encrypt this password. So in order to store the encrypted value of this password, we are going to use a class, and its method is hash make, and then insert the values. So I'm going to put in 1234 because they are easier to remember. Okay, so this way the password value will not be 1234, rather it will be converted into the hash, equivalent hash, and that will be stored in this password variable. Okay, so this is the equivalent hash value for this password. Okay, so now we have provided all the mandatory data. Now we are ready to store this model in our database table. So to store this, we are going to call another method on our customer, which is save. Now this customer is basically an instance of this user model. So this will create one row in the users table in our database. True means a row has been successfully inserted in the users table in the database. Let's verify. refresh, and let's go to users. So we have named user, email user1@user.com. These are empty fields. This is the hash value of the password 12341234. Okay, now we have to do the same for the admin. So we have to create one row in the admin as well over here. Okay, so let's first create a variable admin and create an instance of app models admin. Oh, forgot to put the new keyword. Okay, now admin name, let's give it admin. Let's make it admin1. Then admin email, admin1@admin.com. Now password, but it's hashed equivalent. So password is hash, then it's static method make password 12341234. Okay, now let's save this admin in the database. Okay. Okay, admin1@admin.com. Okay, good. Okay, so now we have one customer and one admin. Now we are ready to test out our authentication logic, the login logic. Refresh. Now let's put in what was user1@user.com. 12341234. Now again we will receive the error that route login is not defined. Okay, so I think our login got failed. Control P. It's login admin. Sorry, customer login. Let's first verify if this function is actually being executed. So if the function is executed, that means there is something wrong within the logic over here. Otherwise, there could be something wrong with the web routes. If there is something wrong with our web routes, that means our request never reaches this method. So we need to make sure that the request does reach this authentication method. So let's call the helper method request. And let's print in all the data. Say one more time just to be extra certain. something.com and then something password. Submit. Okay, so we are entering into this authentication. So what could be the reason? Guys, after so many offline trial and errors, I figured out the problem. The reason I didn't include all those trials and errors because either you would have gotten bored or confused, and I didn't want you to feel any of those feelings, so I skipped that part. Anyway, let me tell you the problem. So the problem is we are expecting our input form to contain a field with the name email and another one with the name password. But the form itself over here, if you notice, has a wrong spelling of the password thing. So let's fix it. Password. And while we are at it, let's add another information, which is if this form contains an error, that is some authentication error occurs. So in that case, we want the error message to be displayed. So for which we have a directive error and end error. So over here we have to display the name of the error, and since over here we are sending these error messages and we have one error message and the name of that field is error as well, so we have to provide. So if this error field exists, that means this error has been returned, then we simply want to display this in a div, its associated message. So this message will display this value, invalid credentials. The other thing that we want to do is that since we are sending back this email field, so we want our login form to contain that old information in case the authentication fails. So for that we have to insert this value, and we are going to call a helper function called old. So if there is an old value for this email, that is the previous value that we entered, this form, this again spelling error. Okay, sorry. This old is supposed to contain the name of the field, which is email. Okay, good. So now if we put in some random values and the authentication fails, then we return, we got redirected back to the login form. But as you can notice, email input field is already filled in, and we have got this error message as well, that invalid credentials. Okay, we need to make same adjustments to the login form for the admin. So copy and paste it over here, and for the value as well. Okay, good. Let's close it. Okay, now put in correct password 12341234. Submit, and we got redirected back to home, customer.home. Redirect intended, otherwise okay. So this is supposed to be route, and the value of this route is customer.home. Okay, let's give it one more try. User1 at user.com 12341234. This is the home page for customer. So we got redirected to the customer's home page. Now since we are logged in, that's why we are able to see this home page. Let's destroy the session data, cookies, delete, close it. Now refresh this page, and because now we are not logged in, because the session data, we have erased the session data, so that means we are not logged in, but we try to access the home page for the customer. And since that home page for the customer is protected through a auth middleware, so the auth middleware says you are trying to access this page while you are not logged in. So what I'm doing, I'm redirecting you to the login page. But the route name for that login page that auth has is this one, login, just login. Whereas the route name that we have assigned to our login page is customer.login. So now we have to fix this problem. So this issue can be fixed through the Authenticate middleware, which is in the kernel file. Sorry, not kernel file, in the middleware. Okay, so HTTP, and this is middleware. So this is the Authenticate middleware. Now this one says that anyone who is trying to access a page which is guarded or which is protected by this authentication middleware, then the user should be redirected to the customer.login page. Okay, so let's go back. Now again, let's try to access the home page for the customer. So now we got successfully redirected back to the customer login page. When we tried to access the home page for the customer while we are not logged in, the auth middleware kicked us out of that page and redirected us to this login page. Now let's go to the admin side and again try to access the home page for the admin. Now the problem is this: when we try to access the home page for the admin while we are not logged in as admin, we should have been redirected back to the admin login form. Rather, we have been redirected back to the customer login form. So we need to fix this problem. But if you notice, over here, we can't fix this problem. There is no way to check that what kind of user this is, and based on the user type, it should be redirected back to different login forms. So in order to fix this problem, let's bring in another piece of the puzzle that we haven't yet discussed, and which is the most crucial aspect of the authentication system in Laravel. And that aspect is called Laravel guards, which are defined in this config folder. We have this auth.php file. So that logic that is defined over here, or the data which is provided over here, is used while authenticating a user. So this auth.php contains some data which is used when authentication related aspects of the application are tested. Now before I explain the contents of this file or the significance of these contents, let me take you back to the login controllers for both the user as well as the admin. So this is the customer login controller. Now if you notice over here, nowhere in this logic I have let Laravel know that you have to verify this user against the users table. Likewise, for the admin login controller, nowhere I have let this application know that it has to authenticate or verify the details or the credentials provided through the login form against the admin's table. So where was Laravel getting this information? Well, Laravel was getting this information from this auth.php file. And where is this auth.php file? Let's close this. This one over here. Okay. So the information defined over here tells Laravel application that whenever authentication is taking place, you should use users table as the default database table against which you have to check the credentials. Since both for the admin as well as the customers, we haven't let our application know that what database table we are interested in for the credential verification. So Laravel automatically verified both the admin as well as the user against the users table. That means currently if you try to log in using the admin login form, we will never ever be able to successfully log in, because those credentials will always be checked against the users table, not the admin's table. Let me show you. Okay, so let's go to admin login page. Now type in admin1 at admin.com, admin1 at admin.com, 1234. Submit, and nothing happened. Because again, let's fix the password spelling in the admin login form. Okay. Refresh. Admin1 at admin.com, 1234. Submit. And it still says invalid credentials, even though we have put in the correct credentials. That's because these credentials are by default checked against the users table, not the admin's table. So now we have to let Laravel know that for the admin's form, you have to check these credentials against the admin's table. And by default, Laravel always uses the default database table, which is users. And that information is provided in this auth.php file. So let's go down. So these are basically called guards. So these are the default defined. So these defaults are taking this guard web, and for the reset passwords, these users tables will be used. We are only interested in for the login form. So basically there is a concept in Laravel called guard. So whenever authentication is taking place, the Laravel always uses a guard. Now what is a guard? So basically guards provides Laravel two types of information. Number one, where is the information stored about the user against which you are going to verify the credentials provided by the user through the login form. And the second piece of information is how is this authentication related information traveled back and forth between the HTTP request and responses so that our application remembers the authenticated user's information. In browser-based applications, once a user gets authenticated, a new session is generated, and that session is sent along with the HTTP response to the browser, where it gets stored in the cookies. And for each subsequent HTTP request that the browser sends back to the server, the browser will attach that session to that HTTP request. This way, our server is able to identify that this HTTP request belongs to this particular session. So this is how we basically turn stateless HTTP into a stateful HTTP. So over here, we are just telling the name of the guard. So over here, we are saying that the default guard that should be used is web. So this is the name of the guard that we are defining over here. Remember, we have one group of middlewares in our kernel file, which is also called web. That web is a group of middlewares, whereas this web is a guard, the name of a guard. Now, if you go further down, you will get to know more information about this guard. So over here, we are defining guards, and this is the guard that has been by default provided. So this web guard contains number 1, a driver, and number 2, a provider. So if we move this one over here, so provider basically provides us that where is this data stored against which the user credentials will be verified, and then how will you let the browser or the client know about this authentication and about this authenticated session. So over here we are saying that we will store this information in the HTTP sessions. So the provider lets us know where is this data stored, that is database table in our case, and the driver lets you know how is this data shared between client and server. But these are just names, they are further defined down. So let's go down. Now for the providers, it's defining the user's provider, and over here it is letting us know that we are using eloquent model, and the exact model is app models user model, which is a class. So basically we are using eloquent models, and the specific model that we are using is user. That's why by default Laravel will always try to verify the credentials against the user's table, because these are the defaults provided over here. However, if we didn't use the eloquent models, the other thing would have been this one, users, but this time instead of using eloquent models, we are directly using the database, and the table is, name of the table is users. But since we are using eloquent models, so let it keep commented out. Okay. So these are the default guards. Now we are going to define our own guard for the admins. So let's create our own guard. Let's give it name admin. And this again has to contain two pieces of information, a provider and a driver. So provider is going to be, let's give it the name admins, and driver is going to be session. Okay, now let's go down and define in the providers this admin, sorry, this admins. Remember, the name of the guard is singular admin and the provider is plural admins. So we have to further define this plural admins. So admin, this admin is supposed to contain two pieces of information, driver and model. So let's copy and paste it over here. We just have to change the model name from user to admin. Okay, so now we have defined the guards. This piece of information related to reset password, since we are not yet covering the reset password, so let's leave it like that. Okay, let's discuss this one more time. So guard basically defines how the Laravel will authenticate the user, and the user can be customer, admin, or anyone. So when we don't provide a guard, then by default this web guard will be used, which contains two pieces of information, provider and driver. Provider means where is that user information stored against which the received username and password will be checked, And the second piece of information is, once the user gets successfully authenticated, then how will this information be traveled back and forth between subsequent HTTP requests and responses. For that, we are letting it know to use the session. So over here, we are defining another guard admin, for which the provider is admins and the driver is session. So now we have to define this admins. So what does this provider admins contain? So in the providers array, we are defining this admin, and basically we are telling it that it is an eloquent model, but the name of the model is admin rather than user. That's it. Now we have made this data available in the auth.php file, which is stored in the config folder of where is it? This one, in this config folder over here. So now our authentication middleware can access this data from this auth.php file. Now let's go to the admin controller, admin login controller. And over here, where we are using the authentication auth facade to verify the credentials, since we are not providing any guard, so by default it is using the web guard, which is fine for the customers. But for the admins, we have to change the default guard. So to change the default guard, we are going to provide this basically we are using this static method guard, which is also defined in the auth facade, and as a parameter we are passing in the name of the guard, which was admin singular. Then we are saying now verify the credentials against that table, which is defined over here. Now within this guard we are using admins table, not the users table. So this time hopefully we will be successfully redirected to the dashboard that belongs to the admin. Let's give it a try. Admin1 at admin.com 1234. Okay, now what's the problem? Auth session guard construct argument 2 must be of type illuminate contract auth provider null given. S is missing. In the providers, it's admins plural. The provider is plural admin. Okay. Refresh. Let's continue. Resubmit the form. Still. Argument 1, user must be a type authenticatable app model given. Okay. Okay. So now we have a different problem, which is says. So basically the error is, what is it? Okay. So whatever user we are providing, it should be authenticatable, must be of type illuminate contract auth authenticatable. So let's open user model. Okay, so this user model, which is provided to us by Laravel, it contains illuminate database, eloquent factory, hash factory is authenticatable. So the complaint is that our admin model does not contain this authenticatable. So it's not extending this authenticatable class. So what we need to do is that we are going to copy this whole class. Copy. Now let's open the admin model. Now notice, compared to the user, this one is much simpler. But what we are going to do is that we are going to paste this user model. And the only thing that we need to do is that we have to change the name of the class from user to admin. So now our admin is authenticatable as well. So only an authenticatable model could be authenticated against or used for login purposes. Okay. Refresh. Continue. Admin1 at admin.com 1234. Submit. It redirected us back to the customer, rather than it should not have redirected us because we provided correct credentials. Okay guys, so there was no error actually, but the reason that we are being redirected back to customer login form is, let me do this admin login one more time. Admin login. So what happens is that when we fill in the email and password and submit the form, it gets received by this authenticate method. Then over here it successfully authenticates us, and then it redirects us to either intended page, which in our case is there is no intended page because we are manually typing in the URL in the address bar. So there is no intended page. So the Laravel tries to take us to the admin.home. Now the problem is that when it goes to this admin.home route, let's open up web routes. So this is the route admin.home. Now this admin.home route is basically taking us to the admin account controller and its home method. So this is admin account. Now if you notice, this is home, which will return the blade file defined in admin account and home.blade.ph. Okay, but the problem is that this whole controller admin account is using a middleware called auth. And since we haven't defined the guard over here, so it's taking the default guard, which is the web guard. And web guard assumes user step. So we have to let this controller know that for this admin account controller, the guard is admin guard, not the default one. So to define a guard over here in the middleware, we have to append this colon, and the guard name is admin. Okay, now let's give it one more try. Admin1 admin.com 1234 1234. Submit, and now we have successfully logged into admin homepage. Now we are able to successfully log in as a user or as an admin, but there are some loose ends that still needs to be fixed. But since this video has gotten too lengthy, so I'm going to end this video over here, and the remaining part is going to be covered in the next video. So don't forget to watch that video as well if you really want to understand multi-user authentication without any packages in Laravel. Until then, happy coding. Bye bye. Oh yes, please don't forget to comment, like, subscribe and share. Thank you so much.